My family kicked me out of the family business. Dad said, "You are so dull. You can never be successful." I left, started my own company, but the business failed. What happened next will shock you. I will tell you everything. First, let me thank you for your continuous support. If you love stories like this one, support us by subscribing to this channel and comment where you are watching us from. It will be great to hear from you. Now let's jump into the details of what happened. I was 29, still showing up to work every morning in the same pressed shirts my mom used to buy me from Kohl's, still parking in the same faded employee spot labeled temp because no one ever got around to updating it. And despite 5 years of loyal service, I was still nothing more than my father's invisible shadow. Officially, I was an operations assistant, but everyone knew I was just the fallback guy, tasked with cleaning up other people's messes and doing whatever grunt work my older brother didn't want to handle. It wasn't that I lacked ambition. I had ideas, dozens of them. Small improvements to streamline our logistics, ways to modernize our outdated tracking system, even a marketing plan I spent 6 months drafting in my spare time. But every time I tried to speak up, I got the same look from Dad. Eyebrows arched, lips pursed, as if I'd interrupted something far more important than me. It wasn't just the silence that hurt. It was the suffocating way he talked about me when I wasn't around, or worse, when I was. I once overheard him telling one of our clients that I meant well, but wasn't built for business. That same day, during lunch, he spent 20 minutes praising my brother's college GPA. Never mind that the guy could barely run a spreadsheet without calling me for help. The final blow came on a Monday morning I'll never forget. The air was already thick with tension. Some shipment delay in Fresno, a client threatening to cancel. I stepped into Dad's office to offer a solution. Just a suggestion, really, nothing dramatic. He didn't even let me finish. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and said, "You're so dull. I swear, I don't know how you think you'll ever be successful." My stomach dropped. I blinked at him, trying to find some trace of humor in his eyes. But he meant it. And then he stood up, walked past me, and muttered, "You're not cut out for this. Maybe it's time you move on." I didn't say a word. I didn't cry, either, though my chest felt like someone had taken a crowbar to it. I just nodded, walked back to my desk, and started clearing it out. No one stopped me. Not my brother, not the receptionist I used to bring coffee every morning. I left the office at 11:37 a.m. with nothing but a cardboard box and the faint ringing of my father's voice still echoing in my ears. So dull. Like I was an outdated light bulb he'd finally gotten around to replacing. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from unraveling. I didn't even turn on the radio. Just me, the road, and a growing pit in my stomach that told me this wasn't just a job I'd lost. It was my last link to a family that had always kept me at arm's length. The worst part was telling my mom. I called her that night, thinking maybe she'd soften the blow. Maybe she'd say Dad was just stressed, or that he didn't mean it. But all I got was a tired sigh and a vague, "You know how your father is." Like that was supposed to make it okay. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't even ask what I was planning next. Instead, she said, "Well, maybe it's for the best. You've always been more sensitive than your brother. Maybe business just isn't your thing." I remember hanging up and staring at my apartment ceiling for hours, trying to piece together when exactly I became the family embarrassment. I had never failed them. I'd shown up every day, done every task, swallowed every insult. And for what? To be thrown out like a defective part in their well-oiled machine? The days that followed were a blur of depression and half-hearted job applications. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I'd stare at my resume, realizing how little there was to show. 5 years in a family business with no title, no raises, no accomplishments I could really claim. My brother had taken credit for most of the ideas I'd whispered to him in confidence, and now I was left with the crumbs. But there was something else bubbling under the surface, rage. Not the kind that exploded, but the slow-burning kind that sat with you in silence. I started journaling late at night, writing down every moment they'd dismissed me, every conversation that made me feel small. And then, one night around 2 a.m., I found myself sketching out an idea I'd had years ago, something the family business would never have tried. It wasn't fully formed, but it was mine. That night marked the beginning of a dangerous thing, belief. Not the loud, arrogant kind, but the quiet, trembling kind that said, maybe they're wrong about you. I knew nothing about starting a business. I had no investors, no reputation, no safety net. But I had resentment. And sometimes resentment, when focused, can become rocket fuel. I started making calls, friends from college, old professors, anyone who might know someone who knew someone. I researched obsessively, learning what I'd never been taught in that family office. And most of all, I remembered every smirk from my brother, every dismissive glance from my dad, every time Mom said, "Your brother's just more practical than you." They lit a fire under me that no pep talk ever could. Still, I wasn't stupid. I knew the odds. Most startups fail. I had rent to pay, and my savings were dwindling fast. But the fear didn't stop me. It fueled me. I kept thinking, if I fail, they win. That thought haunted me every time I hesitated. So I kept going. Late nights turned into early mornings. I taught myself code, designed a rough prototype of my idea, and pitched it to anyone willing to listen. Most said no. Some laughed. But one person, a tech consultant I met through a friend, didn't. He said it was rough, but promising. He agreed to mentor me in exchange for equity. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's assistant. I felt like someone building something real. By the end of that year, I'd launched my first business. It was small, barely scraping by, but it was mine. I didn't tell my family. I didn't call to share the news or invite them to the launch. Part of me still hoped they'd find out and be proud. But another part, larger, darker, wanted them to hear about it secondhand. I wanted them to sit in silence, wondering if maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong about me. Failure is loud in your head, but silent to the world. My first business launched with all the quiet enthusiasm of a dropped pin. I'd poured every waking hour into it, called in every favor, burned through what little savings I had, maxed out a credit card just to keep the website running. It was a subscription-based platform for small vendors to automate their local deliveries, something I knew was needed because I had watched my dad's warehouse staff suffer with clunky, manual processes. But knowing a problem and solving it are two very different beasts. I had no marketing team, no investors, no name recognition. My early adopters were mostly friends doing me favors, and even they quietly dropped off within months. I'd sit there, day after day, refreshing the dashboard analytics like some desperate gambler, hoping his next pull would hit the jackpot. But nothing ever moved. I remember one afternoon, mid-January, gray sky, cold coffee in my hand. I stared at the screen showing 0 new signups and thought, this must be what drowning feels like when no one notices you're gone. When the company failed, it didn't explode, it withered. Quietly. Customers unsubscribed. My contractor disappeared. Bills came in, and the money didn't. My bank account dipped below 0 3 times in 1 month, and each time I got an automated text message that felt like a slap in the face. I told myself I just needed more time, but deep down, I knew I'd built something no one wanted badly enough. I finally pulled the plug one night after my landlord taped a notice on my door reminding me rent was 4 days late. I sat there on my floor, surrounded by empty Red Bull cans and crushed takeout containers, and I cried, not just for the failure, but because I couldn't stop thinking maybe Dad was right. Maybe I was dull. Maybe success wasn't for me. But here's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't kill you, it reconfigures you. 2 weeks after I shut the site down, I got a call from an old college friend who'd heard about what I was trying to build. He didn't offer pity, thank God. But he did invite me to a workshop he was hosting for first-time founders. I went, mostly out of desperation, but I walked away with something invaluable, a different failure, a smarter one. This time, I decided to build something leaner, more focused. I took on gig work to pay the bills, driving Uber and delivering groceries during the day, and at night, I taught myself how to pitch like a human being instead of a nervous wreck. The second idea was a logistics consulting service. A stripped-down version of the first, offering hands-on optimization strategies for small businesses instead of software. It was simple, scalable. I believed in it. And it bombed, too. Not right away. It had a pulse at first, 2 paying clients, then a third who ghosted me halfway through. I sent proposal after proposal, chased leads like a man on fire, but the conversion rate was miserable. Everyone liked the idea, no one wanted to pay. One client gave me a test project that turned into 3 months of free labor. Another flat out told me I was charging too much for someone with no real credentials. That one stung. I was working 70 hours a week just to look like someone who knew what he was doing, and every rejection felt like being undressed in public. And still, I kept going, because what else could I do? Call my dad and admit he was right? Ask my brother for a job referral after he stood silent while I was kicked out? No, pride wouldn't let me. It all unraveled one afternoon when my debit card declined at a gas station. The cashier looked at me like I was trying to scam her, and I had to step aside and pretend I was just transferring funds, while a line formed behind me. But I had no funds. I had nothing. I walked back to my car, sat behind the wheel, and broke down. Full sobs this time. No tough guy tears. Just the kind of weeping that comes from a soul stretched too thin. I didn't know how I was going to make rent, let alone continue pretending I was building a future. That night, I made a spreadsheet of my remaining funds, which came to a humiliating $114.23. I looked at it for a long time and thought, this is it. This is where I stop. I didn't get out of bed for 2 days after that. I ignored calls, skipped meals, and considered applying for jobs I knew I'd hate just to keep the lights on. My pride had bled dry, and all I had left was bitterness. I started avoiding social media because every post from my brother or cousin felt like salt in a wound. Vacation photos, work promotions, family dinners I was no longer invited to. And still, I didn't reach out. I couldn't, not even to my mother. I remembered how easily she had dismissed me, how quickly she'd chosen comfort over compassion. I was tired of begging people who said they loved me to see me. But somewhere in that darkness, a question began to stir. Not a loud one, but persistent. What if you tried one more time? Not for them. Not to prove anything. Just for yourself. Just to see. I told myself no, not again. 2 failures were enough. But the question wouldn't leave. It followed me to the grocery store, into the shower, into the empty job application portals I filled out with gritted teeth. And one morning, before I'd even brushed my teeth, I opened my laptop and started sketching out a third idea. I don't know what made this one feel different. Maybe it was the clarity born from having nothing left to lose. Maybe it was the bitterness finally morphing into clarity. Whatever it was, it came quickly, faster than before, and with more precision. The idea was deceptively simple, a real-time, localized courier network that focused on ethical gig work. I remembered how often small vendors in my father's business complained about unreliable delivery partners, how many corners they had to cut just to make the numbers work. My platform would be local, transparent, and equitable. Drivers would be vetted and paid fairly. Businesses could track every leg of the journey. It would start small, just one metro area. But it would be clean, honest, needed. I knew, because I had lived in the chaos of what didn't work. This time, I wasn't dreaming, I was building. That night, I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I stayed up, drawing wireframes, calculating launch costs, emailing people I hadn't spoken to in years. I reached out to the one mentor who hadn't abandoned me after my last failure, and to my surprise, he agreed to help. He even said, "Third time's the charm, right?" I didn't laugh, but I did nod, because in that moment, buried beneath the rubble of my first 2 crashes, something new was rising. Something stronger than shame. Something rooted in quiet rage, yes, but also in resilience. There was something eerily peaceful about starting over for the 3rd time. Maybe it was because I'd already tasted humiliation so thoroughly that the fear of failing again didn't carry the same weight. I'd lost everything but my name, and even that felt a little scorched around the edges. But with this 3rd venture, there was no delusion of overnight success, no fragile ego dancing on a string. I knew what rock bottom looked like. I'd stared up at the ceiling while eviction notices fluttered through the mail slot and half-finished invoices collected dust. So this time, I built differently. I woke up every morning and worked like a man digging his way out of a grave. Not desperate, but deliberate. I built a list of every vendor I had ever worked with or helped during my family business days. I knew their pain points. I remembered their names. I started reaching out, not with sleazy pitches, but with real solutions. Hey, I know what your mornings look like. I've been there. Let me make it easier. By the third week, I had 4 clients. Not friends, not pity signups. Real, paying clients. I delivered every package myself. No lie. I'd get up at 5 a.m., map the day, throw on a branded hoodie I paid $27 for on Etsy, and hit the road. I logged every delivery, every complaint, every small win. I started hiring part-time drivers, people I'd met during my Uber days, mostly. Folks who knew the hustle, who understood what it meant to be treated like an afterthought by big platforms. I paid them better than they were used to. Not extravagant, but fair. Transparent. I kept margins tight and communication tighter. Clients started referring other clients. I didn't spend $1 on advertising. It was all word of mouth, built on one thing: trust. It felt like breathing again after drowning for months. Each day brought more structure, more belief. Not the trembling kind I had in the beginning. This was sharper, cleaner, more grounded. 6 months in, I rented a tiny office space. It wasn't glamorous, more like a converted storage unit with a window that barely opened, but it was mine. I slapped a logo decal on the door, bought a used desk from Craigslist, and sat down on a Friday evening just to take it all in. I looked around that room and thought, you built this. No one gave it to you. No one even believed you could. And in that quiet, something inside me healed a little. Not all the way, but enough to breathe again without bitterness coating every inhale. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing my father's approval. I didn't feel like the backup son or the family joke. I felt like a man with a mission, with a business that meant something. I was creating jobs, solving problems, proving, if only to myself, that I was never the dull one, just the unrecognized one. As the company grew, I started to hear whispers from back home. My sister sent a vague text one day, something about Dad being stressed about the market. I didn't reply. A former warehouse employee I used to eat lunch with called out of the blue, asking if I was hiring. I heard you're doing something with deliveries, he said, trying to keep it casual. But I could hear it. The tension, the curiosity, the unspoken "you're doing well, aren't you?" It was surreal. For years, I had been the silent one at family dinners, the one they talked over or around. Now they were talking about me, and not in whispers of failure, but in surprise, wonder, maybe even respect. My father hadn't called, of course. Not yet, but I knew it was coming. You don't let your weakest link turn into your strongest competition without feeling the heat. And I was competition now. My business wasn't just surviving, it was outperforming. The local press caught wind of our ethical driver program and wrote a small feature. That feature turned into a podcast interview, and from there, my inbox exploded. Vendors from neighboring cities wanted in. I had to scale faster than I was ready for, but I did it anyway. I onboarded new managers, refined our app, built training systems. I barely slept, but I didn't care. Sleep was a luxury for people who hadn't been laughed out of their own bloodline. For me, this was oxygen. My third business, the one no one believed in, had officially overtaken my father's in revenue. I watched it happen on a spreadsheet one night, side-by-side comparisons of our delivery times, customer retention, and market growth. I didn't feel joy. Not at first. I felt something colder. Like vindication wrapped in steel. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't post flashy updates or call to gloat. I just kept building. But I kept track. Every milestone, every signed contract, every employee thank you note, I saved it all. Not for them. For me. For the kid who walked out of that office with a cardboard box and a broken spine. I wanted to show him that he wasn't a failure. He was just in the wrong room. And now, standing in the right one, he was unstoppable. Meanwhile, my family's business started to crack. First, it was rumors, missed shipments, angry vendors, a lawsuit from a logistics partner who claimed they breached contract. Then came the proof. Their website went down for 2 days. I saw complaints in industry forums. Vendors reached out to me, asking if I could take over their routes. I didn't say no. And then the call came. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon, and my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. Mom. I stared at it for a long time. I considered letting it ring out. But curiosity got the better of me. I answered. Her voice was tight, rehearsed. Hi, honey, she said, as if we'd spoken yesterday. I was wondering if we could talk. I knew what was coming. I let her talk. She danced around it for 5 minutes. Small talk, vague concern, updates about the dog. And then she got to the point. Your father's business is struggling. We might need your help. I could hear the shame in her voice. But there was something else, too. Expectation. As if being her son meant I owed them salvation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lecture. I just asked, why me? She paused. Then, because you're doing well. And we're family. I laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. Family, I said. Is that what we are now? I heard her breath hitch. Don't be cruel, she said. I'm asking for help. I wanted to scream. Where was this compassion when I was sleeping on the floor of my apartment? Where was this concern when I was driving groceries to strangers just to eat? But I didn't scream. I spoke with the calm of a man who'd found peace. No, I said. You told me I wasn't cut out for business. You all did. So forget about my help. I'm better being alone. And then I hung up. I didn't feel guilty after hanging up on my mother. I waited for the guilt to come, the sting of regret, the hollow ache that used to follow every argument we ever had, but it didn't arrive. Instead, I sat there in the silence of my office, staring at the wall as the last of the afternoon light poured through the window. It wasn't joy I felt, not even relief. It was something quieter, heavier, like laying down a burden I didn't realize I'd been carrying since the day I first stepped into my father's business wearing a cheap tie and a borrowed sense of purpose. I wasn't just letting go of the guilt they'd conditioned me to feel. I was severing the rope. No more explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. No more hoping they'd come around. That call from my mom confirmed what I always suspected. They only valued me when they needed me. Love, in my family, had always come with a receipt. The days that followed that call were strangely calm. I kept waiting for some kind of backlash, a voicemail from my brother, a guilt-tripped text from my sister, maybe even a cold call from my father trying to manipulate me under the guise of just talking. But nothing came, just radio silence. I thought maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe my mother hadn't told them how the call went. Or maybe. And this was the thought that lingered the longest. They were scrambling, watching the ship go down with no idea how to fix it. Meanwhile, my business thrived. Our onboarding waitlist doubled. We launched in a second city. I hired my 20th employee. I started walking into industry meetings and seeing people nod at me with familiarity, not skepticism. I was no longer the underdog trying to prove he belonged. I was the benchmark they were trying to catch. But word travels fast in a small industry. And eventually, the collapse of my father's business made its way to me, not through family, but through former employees, vendors, even competitors. They were bleeding cash. A major supplier had pulled out after 3 consecutive missed payments. Their insurance premiums spiked after a workplace injury that had been quietly swept under the rug. The warehouse they once owned outright was up for sale. At first, I felt numb hearing it. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded and listened. It was surreal. This company had been a monument to my father's pride for over 2 decades, the family's golden calf. And now it was crumbling. Slowly. Publicly. Inevitably. I finally saw my father at a logistics networking gala I almost didn't attend. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I'd passed the invitation off to one of my project leads, but he came down with the flu last minute, and I decided, fine, why not? The venue was downtown, sleek and full of the same faces who used to pretend not to see me when I was just the son of that guy. But now, people walked up to me. They asked my opinion. They offered collaboration deals. It felt like slipping into a new skin, one I'd earned, not inherited. And then, across the room, I saw him. My father, standing near the bar, smaller than I remembered. Thinner. His posture wasn't quite as sharp, and his hair had gone grayer than I expected. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, our eyes locked. Just for a second. I thought he might come over. Thought maybe he'd pretend nothing happened, strike up small talk, test the waters. But he didn't. He looked away, turned his back, kept drinking, and that was all I needed to see. I wasn't angry. I didn't even want an apology anymore. I just wanted distance. So I turned and walked the other way. Later that night, as I stood on the rooftop balcony sipping club soda and breathing in the humid city air, my sister found me. She must have followed me out from the ballroom. She looked polished as ever, designer heels, perfect hair, the kind of confidence you can only fake for so long. "He's not doing well," she said without preamble. I didn't respond. She stepped closer. "Mom told me you hung up on her, that you won't help." Her voice had a bite to it, but it was coated in something else. Desperation, maybe, or shame. I looked at her, tired of the games. "Why would I?" I asked. "Why would I help people who watched me struggle and never once reached out?" She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "You're not a victim anymore. You've clearly won. Isn't that enough?" I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so deeply absurd. "You think this was about winning?" I said. "I didn't build this to get back at anyone. I built it because I had no one. Because when you all turned your backs on me, this was the only thing that kept me from disappearing." She didn't reply. She looked down at her shoes like maybe they held better answers. "They're your family," she finally said. "They're broken." I nodded. "And I'm not the glue." She walked away after that. No hug, no truce, just silence and the click of her heels against the concrete. And I stood there a while longer, letting the night wrap around me like armor. That moment wasn't closure. It was confirmation. I didn't need their recognition anymore. I didn't crave their love. I had become something they never expected, whole without them. Stronger for the silence. Successful not in spite of their betrayal, but because of it. And as I left the gala that night, sliding behind the wheel of a car I bought with my own sweat and failure, I finally understood what freedom felt like. Not revenge, not even justice, just peace. The fallout didn't stay in the family. It never does. When a legacy business collapses, especially one built on ego and long-standing community ties, people talk. And when the son who was branded dull suddenly becomes a headline, people pick sides. Within a month of that networking gala, my name started showing up in conversations I wasn't a part of. A regional business blog ran a piece titled, "How the Outcast Son Built the City's Fastest-Growing Courier Startup." It wasn't even something I approved or participated in. The journalist pulled quotes from an old podcast interview and filled in the blanks with speculation. But it lit a match. Suddenly, I was getting calls from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. College classmates, ex-coworkers, distant relatives. They all wanted to say the same thing in different ways. "Wow, you really showed them." And every time, I gave the same tight-lipped response. Wasn't trying to. But it didn't matter. The narrative had taken off. To them, I was the prodigal son. But not the one who returned home. I was the one who left, succeeded, and let the house burn down behind him. Some people called it cold. Others called it poetic. But the truth, like always, was messier than anyone wanted it to be. I didn't engineer their downfall. I just refused to be part of their rescue. And that refusal, that quiet, devastating no, echoed louder than any billboard I could have paid for. I started noticing the shift in how I was treated. Industry peers who used to ignore me now offered to buy me drinks. Former critics tried to rewrite history, talking about how they always saw potential in me. It was nauseating, watching people bend themselves into knots trying to stand next to success like it might rub off on them. The gossip was relentless. At one point, someone sent me a screenshot from a Facebook thread, an old family friend speculating that I'd sabotaged the business from the inside before leaving. Another claimed I had stolen client data, as if I'd somehow orchestrated a hostile takeover at 29 with a flip phone and a negative bank balance. The lies didn't hurt so much as they annoyed me. I'd worked too damn hard to be accused of shortcuts. I considered issuing a public statement, maybe even a cease and desist to the loudest rumor mills. But I didn't. I knew who I was, and I knew what I wasn't. That was enough. Still, it stung seeing people defend the very family that discarded me. Some claimed I should help, that it was my duty to honor my roots. As if abuse deserved reverence just because it came wrapped in a last name. The situation escalated when someone from a local business association reached out, asking me to speak on a panel about turning adversity into opportunity. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to burn the whole room down with the truth. But I didn't. I declined. I wasn't interested in becoming a mascot for resilience. I just wanted to keep building. But the pressure kept mounting. At a vendor summit, a man I'd never met approached me mid-conversation and said, "So what's the deal with your dad? I heard his company's up for auction." He said it like he was asking about the weather, like it wasn't my family's shame he was casually dragging into small talk. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "I wouldn't know. I don't speak to him." That shut him up fast. Still, the public nature of their downfall forced my hand eventually. I couldn't keep pretending it had nothing to do with me, not when clients started asking directly. "Are you guys affiliated with that company?" They'd ask cautiously. "Just want to make sure we're not walking into any drama." I started drafting a standard response. No affiliation, no shared management, no overlapping staff. We're an independent operation. But even as I typed the words, I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Not from shame, from fury, because after all this time, they were still making my life harder, just in new ways. Not through direct control, but through reputation. Through shadows they cast over rooms they no longer even stood in. I tried not to let it get to me. I tried to stay focused. But then came the voicemail. It was from my mother, of course. She didn't even try to hide the threat. "If you don't at least speak to your father," she said, her voice clipped and composed, "people are going to start wondering if you're part of the reason the company failed. I don't want to have to explain that to anyone." I played it 3 times, each time waiting for the part where she realized how grotesque that sounded. It never came. She was blackmailing me, not with money or secrets, but with the fear of public perception, as if my reputation was still theirs to ruin. As if I owed her anything but silence. I didn't call her back. I didn't even text. I just saved the voicemail, just in case. I showed it to one person, my operations director, Jamal. He listened, shook his head, and said, "Man, I think they still believe you're that kid from 5 years ago." And he was right. That's what made it so infuriating. They hadn't grown. They hadn't changed. They still thought love was leverage and silence was loyalty. But I was done playing their games. That night, I wrote a statement, not a public one, but something I sent internally to our team. It read, in part, "There is no connection between our company and family business name. We stand on our own values, our own merit, and our own labor. We do not entertain rumors, and we do not engage in legacy narratives." My employees applauded. A few even shared their own stories of family betrayal. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been underestimated. A week later, I ran into an old friend from high school at a cafe. He looked surprised to see me, said something like, "Man, I thought you disappeared after your family stuff." I smiled and said, "I did. And then I came back better." He laughed, but I meant it. That was the truth. I'd vanished from their story so I could write my own. I didn't need a rewrite. I needed a fresh page. And now, finally, I was turning it without shame, without fear, without obligation. Some endings don't come with grand finales or slamming doors. Sometimes they come in the form of quiet mornings, uninterrupted, drama-free, and full of a peace so unfamiliar it almost feels like guilt. I woke up on the first Sunday after the voicemail storm had passed and realized I hadn't thought about my father once that entire week. No tense dreams. No imagined confrontations. Just normal sleep, normal days, and a steady rhythm of living life without the background noise of needing to prove something. That kind of silence was new to me. For most of my adult life, my inner monologue had been fueled by rejection, shame, and the desperate hunger to make them eat their words. But when you finally do it, when the words are swallowed, when the silence sets in, you start to understand that revenge isn't the end game. Peace is, and peace is a lot quieter than I expected. I didn't tell anyone when the auction for my father's company was officially announced. The paperwork was filed on a Monday. I saw the public notice online, bookmarked it, then closed the tab. I didn't forward it to anyone. I didn't make a cryptic post about karma or full circle moments. I just sat with it, alone, and it felt okay, not triumphant, not tragic, just done. Like a chapter finally closing after too many years of reading the same page. There was a time when I would have fantasized about showing up to the auction just to be seen, to let them know I was still standing while they crumbled. But I didn't go. I didn't need to. Their downfall didn't need my applause, and my success didn't need their collapse to matter. I started spending more time at the office, not out of necessity, but because I liked it there. It was mine. Every inch of it bore my fingerprint. The team I built, the systems we created, the community we served. It was all a testament to what happens when you believe in someone no one else did. I made a habit of checking in with every new hire personally, not just to welcome them, but to make sure they knew they mattered, that they weren't invisible like I had been. One afternoon, during one of those check-ins, a new driver named Alexis told me, "This is the first job where I don't feel like I have to earn the right to be respected." I nodded, thanked her, and went back to my office. But later that night, I sat in my car and cried. Not out of sadness, out of gratitude, because that was all I ever wanted, for someone to believe I was worthy without condition. The last time I saw my mother was in a grocery store parking lot. It was unplanned, and the moment was small enough that it could have passed without incident. But she saw me before I could turn away. She called my name, walked up quickly, and I could see it on her face. She thought this was her chance. That we'd talk, reconnect, maybe even hug. She started with pleasantries. "You look good," she said, eyeing my clothes, my car, my groceries like they were foreign to her. "Things must be going well." I nodded, said nothing. She tried again. "Your father? He's not the same. He's been humbled." I looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pull to comfort her, to soften the blow. I just said, "So was I? And none of you cared." She blinked, like she didn't know what to say. So I helped her. "I'm not angry," I said. "Not anymore. But I don't want a relationship built on guilt. If you're here to apologize, that's fine. But don't do it expecting anything in return." She didn't apologize. She just sighed and said, "I didn't know how much it hurt you." I smiled, half sad, half tired. "You didn't want to know." And then I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't check the rearview mirror when I pulled out. I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I just felt light, like I'd finally dropped a weight I'd been conditioned to carry. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring out the window at the skyline. The city was glowing, the way it always does when you're finally calm enough to notice. I thought about the first night I'd ever dared to dream of building something for myself. How far-fetched it seemed, how hopeless I'd felt. And then I thought about the man I was now. No longer building for revenge, no longer seeking validation, just building because I believed in what I was doing. And that, I realized, was enough. More than enough. I wasn't the dull son anymore. I wasn't the black sheep or the forgotten one. I was my own man, and I liked who I was. A friend once told me that some wounds don't heal, they just scar over and become part of your skin. And maybe that's true. Maybe I'll always carry the imprint of what they did, what they said, how they made me feel. But scars don't define you. They remind you. And every time I look at what I've built, every time someone tells me this company changed their life, I remember where I came from. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because it wasn't love that built this. It wasn't approval. It was rejection. Rejection forced me to find value in myself. And I'm never giving that up again. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most, this story is for you. Sometimes the greatest power comes not from proving them wrong, but from realizing you never needed their approval in the first place. If this story hit home, share it, comment your thoughts, and let's talk about how we protect our peace, even when it means standing alone. See you soon in the next story.